Hello everyone, welcome to this meeting of the Planning Committee, which is being held at the Civic Offices and is being streamed to the Council's YouTube channel. I'm Councillor Stephen Brown, Chair of the Committee. Members of the Committee are present in the room tonight and I will ask them to introduce themselves shortly. As you'd expect, a number of officers have also joined us. For those present tonight, please be aware that we're not expecting a fire alarm this evening, and in the event that the alarm sounds, please exit the building via the nearest marked exits and assemble outside as indicated by the marshals. I'll now ask the councillors and officers present to introduce themselves, and I'm going to start with Councillor Montague, please.
I am Councillor Montague, member of the committee.
Councillor Sophie Bell, member of this committee.
Councillor Keith McLean, one of the two vice chairs of the committee.
Councillor Rex Exon, another vice chair of the committee.
And Councillor Trendall from that side.
Councillor Paul Trendall, and a member of the committee.
Councillor Sue Smith, a member of this committee.
Councillor Saskia Soden, and a member of this committee.
Jennifer Pfeiffer, Development Services Officer.
Tamlin Barton, Senior Planning Officer, DM.
Justin Wickersham, Viability Expert on item 6A.
Good evening, everybody. John Palmer, Head of Planning.
Good evening, Elizabeth Verdigam, Team Leader in Development Management.
Good evening, Catherine Hall, Head of Legal.
Evening all, Alex Mealy, Senior Governance and Scrutiny Officer.
And the just-in-time Councillor Kendrick to introduce himself.
Yes, apologies, Chair, Darren Kendrick, substitute member for Wacker's Ahmed.
Thank you very much. Perfect timing. We have 2 planning applications and 1 tree preservation order to consider this evening. For the benefit of all, I will now describe how we will conduct the meeting. For each application, the officer will introduce the application, and where there are presentations, these will be displayed on the screens and on the recording. I will then invite those who've registered to speak in advance of the meeting to come forward. We'll ask that officers deal with any points of clarification from the councillors following the presentation, and then move the recommendation in the report and invite a member of the committee to second. This does not indicate that either of us support the proposal, but allows us to debate the matter. I will then invite committee members to raise any points of debate. Each member will have up to 3 minutes to speak. To be clear to members of the public present and online, for all applications on the agenda, we will only be considering material planning matters as set out in planning law. If any amendments are proposed, they must be moved and seconded and then voted upon. And once all contributions have been made, I will sum up and take a vote on the motion or amend a motion. I would ask that all participants keep their contributions to their allotted time and speak only when invited to do so by the chair. If legal advice is required at any stage, I will invite the council's legal representative to comment. Voting will be conducted via a show of hands, and if a recorded vote is requested, a vote will be taken by name. For the benefit of the members of the public, I will just highlight that the use of electronic device by committee members during the meeting is for them to access their agendas online and may also wish to access background papers or policy documents. Just before we move on to the full agenda, I'm just going to highlight for members of the committee that there is an advisory note on the consultation on the National Scheme of Delegation, which was circulated before the meeting, and there's a print copy on your table as well. This is not part of the evening's agenda, but I would encourage members to read the note in full and respond to the consultation, which ends on the 23rd of April, should they wish to do so. And if anyone wants to have a conversation after the other items on the agenda, we can stay and have a quick chat about that. Moving on to the agenda items, apologies. Alex, do we have any apologies this evening?
Yes, Chair. So apologies received from Councillor Ahmad, substituted by Councillor Kendrick.
Thank you very much. Minutes. We have the minutes of the meeting of the Planning Committee held on the 5th of March and the Planning Panel on the 19th of February to approve tonight. Are the minutes agreed? Thank you very much. Declaration of interest. Councillors should declare any disclosable pecuniary interest, other registrable interest or non-registrable interest, including other pecuniary interests they may have in the business to be transacted, and officers to disclose any interest they may have in any contract to be considered. Does anyone wish to disclose any interest? I'll go for Kendrick and then Montague.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Board member for Central Milton Keynes, but I haven't engaged with anybody on this. All queries and comments have been directed to my 2 board members. Thank you.
Just that I am, so related to the TPO item, it's in my ward. I am aware of the issue. I don't believe I've said anything that makes me predetermined, and I am here tonight with an open mind, so I believe I can participate fully. But just to be transparent.
Thank you very much, both. And Councillor McLean.
Thank you. Just for the record, I'm a Vice President of the Milton Keynes Community Foundation, which relates to application 2. It's an honorary role. I had no knowledge of this application until I saw it in the papers, so I had no previous input to it.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? No? Okay. Public participation questions. Alex, have we received any questions not related to the items on this evening's agenda?
None received, Chair.
Lovely. In that case, we'll move on to item 6A, which is 489-499 Avery Boulevard. I'm going to ask Elizabeth to introduce the report, just to highlight for members of the committee that Elizabeth is not the case officer for this one. The case officer has had to unfortunately go home ill this afternoon, so we might go at a more gentle pace than otherwise if there are complicated questions.
Yes, I may have to look things up if I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. Thank you, Chair. So this application is for 489-498 Avery Boulevard, which is the former Argos HQ building, demolition of the existing building and erection of a new residential apartment building for 350 units, as well as all the external works. This is the site location plan, which is etched in red, and it's located on the north side of Avery Boulevard. To the north of the site is the Holiday Inn Hotel and the Bannatyne Health Club. To the west of the site is an existing vacant plot with the Almere located beyond. The hub is just beyond this. To the east and the south is public parking provision. The area in blue to the south is the parking referenced in the report, which is under a long-term lease agreement with the building. That's this square here. And in the far north is the Christ the Cornerstone Church, which is referenced in the report, just up here by the, just to the right of the word location. These are some photos of the site. So on the left is a view from the southwestern corner of the application site looking east. And on the right is a photo looking north up close to the front elevation of the existing building. On the left is a picture of the side access as existing. This loops back around the back of the building to Summer Court, and the view from the south of, and on the right is the view of the south of Avery Boulevard, facing towards the front of the building, and you can see the Almere just to the left of this picture for context. This is the site layout plan demonstrating the U-shaped building proposed with the courtyard to the front of the building. The proposed allocated parking provision is also located to the front. You can see the loop round to the rear of the building, which provides level access to the cycle storage and the apartments on the lower level. The main entrance is located where the red arrow is located, which is just here more or less in the middle, with a secondary entrance on the left of the courtyard. These are our proposed elevations. So the top left is the front elevation, with the elevation on the right being that viewed from the east of the site. On the bottom we have the rear elevation on the left and the view from the west on the right. These elevations have been amended through the pre-application process, including taking on feedback given by Design Southeast, which is explained in the report. And there is a new crown to the build, or a crown that's been revised as part of the application process to finish the building at high quality, and the materials have been considered and amended throughout. Urban design officers are now satisfied with the proposed palette of materials. This is the proposed ground floor plan, which shows the entrance lobby, amenity spaces, and the courtyard proposed to the front of the building. This ground floor largely consists of amenity spaces with a few apartments proposed within the small garden areas. The application has been amended to address the level changes in this area and provide landscaping to improve privacy for these ground floor residents. This is a typical floor plan of the upper levels of the building. This is floor 1, so it provides direct access to Summer Court to the north. And this is a typical floor plan of the upper levels. And this shows the proposed roof terrace, which is the shared private amenity space. This has been extended to the full roof space of this part of the building, following concerns about the amount of amenity space to be provided. Here are some visualizations. This is the view from the southeast and view from Avery towards the intersection with Saxon Gate. That's this one. So the key considerations is the site has been reasonably marketed to demonstrate a long-term employment use is no longer viable in this location. It's considered to be a high-quality redevelopment of a brownfield site. You'll note from the report that there's slight harm is identified to the setting of Church of Christ the Cornerstone, but the benefits of the scheme are considered to outweigh this harm and there's limited conflict with policy. So as per the detailed recommendation and the subsequent update paper, which sets out a slight amendment to the section 106, the planning obligations being sought, it's recommended that the application be approved subject to conditions and completion of the section 106 agreement. If members have any questions on viability, then our viability consultant is here to answer them. And that concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have one registered speaker in objection for this application. So can you come forward to the chamber floor? Councillor Murphy, you know the drill. You'll have 3 minutes to speak, and I will try and make you aware when there are 30 seconds remaining.
We objected to this application and requested that it be referred to determination as it is contrary to policy. Our offer to meet the case officer to discuss this was not taken up, and only the requirement of conditions to prevent demolition prior to construction, a construction contract, has been included. We maintain our objection. The scheme fails to meet parking standards. The defence is that there remains sufficient provision within the public on-street parking in the vicinity, the same parking already allocated for Westminster House, Jaipur and Bank House schemes. This appears to be a case of double accounting. There is no dedicated disabled parking on site, although wheelchair adaptable flats are being offered. There should be toddler play provision on site. A contribution for off-site facility is not acceptable, as families will be forced to travel some distance even if a site can be found nearby. The scheme has no balcony provision. External private amenity space in flats is fundamental to the health and well-being of residents. This is a view shared by the council officers, who merely state that it is disappointing that balconies are not included. Shared external amenity space is well below the required standard. The site is within the CB Central Business District, where employment use is protected by Plan MK 2019 Policy ER2. The application is contrary, therefore, to current policy. The draft MK City Plan is not yet policy, but the evidence base for employment space in CMK suggests that more space is required, not less. To reduce emissions, national policies require that developments with substantial demolition should demonstrate that a conversion option has been considered. There is no evidence that this has been done. Our principal objection to the scheme, like all recently approved BTR schemes, build-to-rent schemes, provides zero affordable housing on the basis of viability. We now have 8 consented build-to-rent schemes lined up. None have started, as they are not fundable, as funders see an oversupply of this product at a time when the demand for flats and rents have fallen. So why do we need more that provide no social housing benefits to MK? The proposal that the council can claw back monies for affordable housing from the developer through future rental growth is highly optimistic when build costs continue to rise and rents fall. Lack of investor interest in build-to-rent flats is leading to planning blight in CMK, with empty sites for unviable or unfundable developments like the food centre. Based on their opinion, officers recommend that you approve. As on balance, these failures to meet policies are outweighed by undefined social and economic benefits to CMK. The decision about the balance of benefits and harms should be decided by you, our elected representatives. Reject or defer the scheme. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So could you turn the microphone off? Darren, could you? Thanks. The right of reply has been offered to the applicant and their agents. I believe Jennifer Smith is going to be responding. Likewise, you will have 3 minutes, and I will try and nudge you when you have 30 seconds remaining.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. My name is Jennifer Smith and I'm the agent for the application. The proposal before you today has been thoroughly assessed by planning officers and statutory consultees, and the application has been deemed acceptable. As such, it is recommended for approval, and we respectfully request that members follow the advice of officers and grant planning permission. There are no public objections to the planning application, with only one objection being received from the Town Council, who we've heard from this evening. A number of their objections have been found to be unsound at recent planning appeals at sites in central Milton Keynes, including conflict with the neighbourhood plan, matters in respect of parking and amenity space. We've also heard this evening that the building should be considered about whether or not it's suitable for conversion, and we have confirmed through the application process that it is not. It's a purpose-designed, a single office building built in the 1980s, which is unable for conversion. Officers, however, have concluded that development is acceptable and that the scheme is making Section 106 contributions which adequately provide for infrastructure to support the development, including education, play space and health. The applicant seeks the demolition of the vacant Sainsbury's Argos building and the construction of 350 residential apartment buildings and associated facilities. The current office building has been vacant since July 2023. Sainsbury's have marketed the building and received no viable offers for the continued use of the site for employment use. This overcomes the objection in relation to policy ER2 and makes the scheme policy compliant. The proposals offer an opportunity to revitalise a brownfield site in a highly sustainable and appropriate location, bringing new activity and vibrancy to central Milton Keynes. The scheme has been shaped through an extensive pre-application process, as well as the applicant engaging with the LPA's pilot design review process. The development proposes 350 units, utilising the existing assigned car parking to the site, both immediately outside the building, which includes for disabled parking, contrary to what we have heard, and 130 additional spaces located on South 5th Street. Highways officers have no objection to the scheme in respect of the parking proposals. Given the site's highly sustainable position, within easy reach of central Milton Keynes amenities and public transport, the development is expected to generate fewer car trips than the existing building and therefore justifies the required parking spaces. Residents will benefit from generous communal spaces, as the officer has already demonstrated, including ground floor courtyard and a roof terrace. The applicant has agreed to condition 3, which is within your papers, in respect of vacancy and a provision of a contract for demolition. There are significant benefits associated with the development, which are both economic, social and environmental. Given the acknowledged benefits in delivering the scheme, we commend to the committee to support the officer's recommendation and grant planning permission for this scheme. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do officers wish to offer any points of clarification raised by the points from the speakers?
Thank you, Chair. I think most of those points were covered by the applicant's agent. Just to point out that we do obviously have had a number of these types of applications recently for build to rent. Some of them have been built. The Almere is a good example. The former Boback House, which I think is called Arbour now, we went to on a committee visit when was it, last year? A few months ago? I can't remember. But, some of these sites have come forward and are proving to be quite popular, but obviously that's not something to take into account.
Thank you very much. Do councillors have any questions of clarification for the officers? And can I remind you that as far as possible, we'll deal with the questions of clarification before we move into debate. Councillor Montague.
Please, can I ask about the parking? I'm asking because when I first read through, my first thought was exactly what the objector said, which is we've used the same rationale on parking for everything that's been approved in central Milton Keynes, and do we not get to a point where there genuinely isn't enough parking? Does anybody look at the picture on the whole as to what has been approved and whether we've already allocated some of the parking spaces to the point being made? Has that assessment been done? Do we have a view, basically?
Highways are aware of all of the applications that have come forward in the do take that into account because it's a material consideration if something has planning permission. But none of the parking is allocated, so it would all be under residence permit or under the normal standard bays. So you can't say that any of those spaces would be allocated to any of the buildings, and they are fairly close together, but they are quite far apart in terms of residents looking for parking spaces. So the spread is considered to be acceptable by Highways.
Any other questions from the committee? Councillor.
Thanks, Chair. One short one, one longer one, sorry. Short one first then. How much is the residence permit?
I don't know the answer to that, I'm afraid. And it's not really relevant to the scheme in front of us.
No, it's relevant when someone says to me, there's no parking, how much is it going to cost me, councillor? That's when it gets relevant. It gets relevant when real people ask me real questions, and I'd love to be able to give them the answer. Does anyone know?
765?
Sorry, mate?
It might be 765 or close to it.
765, not £7.35 then.
And that gets you 22 minutes, that, £7.65.
Bargain.
No, I think it was 765 per annum last time we looked at it.
Thanks, Keith.
That could be a year or two ago, though.
Thanks, Keith. Really appreciate that. Second one, longer question. Can you explain to us the 106 arrangements? Because they are scattered a wee bit in the document and quite complicated.
So the version of the Section 106 that the applicant has agreed to in principle is within the update paper. So that includes the revised education contribution, which is slightly lower than the original report. So it's in the table on page 7 of the update paper. That would be the, sorry, not that one. The version at U3.3, so that's page 8 and 9 of the, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong part.
I think it straddles all 3 pages.
Yes, that's why I'm confused. So
I suppose what I'm asking is, it starts off by saying it should be 16 million, but we know it's not going to be that. What is it going to be instead of the 16?
Okay. So the infrastructure contributions that we are seeking now, after we've had the revised education contribution, is 1.864 million. Applicants agreed to pay that, and then the affordable housing contribution, which is subject to viability, has been, we will not be getting that because it's subject to a viability argument.
And no money in lieu?
No, no. Because the scheme is shown to be not viable, so they can't pay that.
No. Okay.
And policy allows for that to happen.
Yep.
Go for Councillor Kendrick first.
Yes, thank you, Chair. With rising costs and sites on other sites, although we're concentrating just on this one as a generalisation, in principle, the monies are in principle. With rising costs, will there be a time where someone will come back and want to reduce what's been agreed in principle?
The infrastructure contributions, so the 1.8 million are index linked, so it depends on the time that they pay them. That's considered by officers as necessary in order to mitigate the impact of the development, so they have to pay that essentially for us to consider the application acceptable. There is a review mechanism regarding the affordable housing, so that if costs change significantly by a certain date, then there is a review of that process, but we can't say what might happen in the next 18 months in the economy.
So to kind of supplement that, whilst the policy for the affordable housing has the viability kind of clause within it, which allows that kind of consideration as to whether the affordable housing can go down to a 0 level and the scheme still be policy compliant, for other types of kind of contributions, say education or health, there isn't a similar kind of viability clause or consideration. So, as Elizabeth said, that total comes to 1.8 something million. If that was not met, then the scheme would not be acceptable because it wouldn't be mitigating the impacts of that development. So you would have a different recommendation potentially in front of you if that was the situation. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Montague, do you have another one?
Yes, I know I had another one. I couldn't remember what it was when I first went. It's around the change of use and sort of about the viability of the land as continued business use. It seems to me that it's in the middle of the central business district. It would be more sensible for it to be business use. I understand that it's been marketed. I've sort of read that information, although clearly I've not seen what was marketed or who made what offers, etc. Not that anybody would give me that information. Failing the ability to keep it as an office building entirely, it also strikes me that the most sensible thing would be to have office space or business space on the ground floor and residential space above it. I guess we have no way of amending the scheme today for that, to achieve that, but was that considered as viable? That's closer to policy, to what the existing policy is, I think. Can somebody just comment on around that, on how that meets policy, what's being proposed meets or doesn't meet policy? It's a bit of a vague question, but hopefully you see what I'm getting at.
I might need to bring Justin in here to a degree in terms of explaining what's been put to us for assessing. As is always the case, we're required to assess the application that is put in front of us and to determine whether that is acceptable or not. And obviously, the assessment you have before you in terms of the report is based on our consideration of the application that has been submitted to us. But whether there's anything Justin would want to add in relation to kind of how the viability assessment was undertaken in relation to that.
Yeah, I think the simple position here is we can only run the viability based on the application that's before us. And obviously, if that changes during the course of the planning application, then sometimes there's a requirement to look at that again and reassess to see how that application is looking. And that's certainly been the case on other cases that I've been involved in Milton Keynes. But in this situation, the application that was submitted has been assessed, and it's been assessed to the degree that there is a substantial shortfall in viability terms because the costs simply outweigh the revenues by a substantial amount. In terms of, I think, part of the question perhaps was about, have you looked at other cases if you added in this? That my understanding as a planner is that we can't do that. We can only look at what's before us, but that's more of a comment from me as a viability expert, but I'm sure the officer can help further otherwise.
Can I tweak Leo's question a little bit for the planners? So it mentions in the report, in terms of the marketing of the building, that it was both marketed. There was at first just a couple of floors, and then the building as an entirety. That wasn't, neither of those were successful. And in terms of our decision tonight, we can only make the decision on what's been put in front of us, and that wise. Is there any requirement from the marketing aspect to market it not just in terms of the office space that is available there, but as a redevelopment office space before it becomes a redevelopment for a residential space? Or a redevelopment for an employment space before it becomes redevelopment for residential? So do we require them, for example, to see if it's viable to market that site for R&D purposes or that side of things as well?
The policy says that the applicants must demonstrate through evidence, including marketing of the site, there is no longer a reasonable prospect of it being used for the existing or designated employment use. So not just the existing building, but the employment use generally.
So they will have provided some level of evidence that it wouldn't have been viable to redevelop it as an employment site, not just to use as offices as it was or is now.
Yes, to our satisfaction that they've done it.
To add a couple of points to that, is those employment uses include fairly kind of heavy industrial type uses, which wouldn't be acceptable in this kind of location. So you wouldn't expect an applicant to market a site for a use that's, in planning perspective, is just going to be wholly unacceptable to begin with. The report does acknowledge that the marketing doesn't cover research and development type uses, which could be a acceptable use within a town or a city centre. So the report does acknowledge there is a kind of a partial conflict with policy ER2 in that respect, which again is one of the reasons why the application has been referred to committee tonight.
Thank you. Councillor McLean was next, and then we'll come back to
Thank you. I think I need to apologise to Paul and the committee. The residence parking permit is £25. I think I gave the figure for a workers parking permit, so it's a lot cheaper. Sorry, but for him.
That's all right. Per annum, that is a bargain, isn't it?
Councillor Kendrick, you had a thought?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Following on from Councillor Montague's questions, with regards to looking at future in applications of a different type, we look at what on-board parking there is, Will there be a move, obviously, if commercial or otherwise office use building being converted to housing, the building isn't viable, it is viable to be converted, obviously that's a different matter, but where buildings are being completely razed to the ground and started again, well, should we not be encouraging people to provide on-board ground floor parking for these places? Because, as my Councillor Montague says, there is going to come a point where we are going to be these, despite what highways may or may not think at this particular moment in time, going forward into the future, we will be counting the same spaces over and over again for multiple uses for people who are living or working or visiting.
So there's a couple of aspects to that. I mean, firstly, as I said earlier, we have to consider the applications in front of us tonight, and we take that under advice from highways officers and the professional technical advice they provide us as the local planning authority to feed into the report and the recommendation that's in front of you tonight. And obviously, as you've seen, there isn't an objection there from highways colleagues. The other thing to point out in the report, to pick up on this, is the existing office use of the building actually results in a higher level of parking requirement usage in comparison to the residential use of the site. So from that respect, if the building was converted, reused for offices, it would conceivably have a higher kind of demand pressure for parking than the proposal that's in front of members tonight. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Bell.
Notwithstanding the general lack of parking, what I've noticed as well is that obviously there's only, of the 6 parking places, actually only 2 of them are accessible parking. Given, I think the latest statistic is something like 4.9% of the country have a blue badge. I get that, not feeding into the debate about whether people could park further away and walk there, that's not, most of the people that have blue badges can't do that, so we're kind of, it doesn't matter how many wheelchair accessible units and things we put in these places, they're not genuinely accessible if we're not providing that accessible parking close by to where people are living, and event you're essentially sort of putting a sort of a block up that prevents people with disabilities from actually being able to live in these accommodations. Is the lack of accessible parking policy compliant?
Yes, because there's only 6 places actually provided, the amount of accessible parking is proportionate to the parking requirement. So we can't require any more because we're not providing any more.
Any other questions, Councillor Exxon?
Oh, where to start? I'll start on page 77. It's paragraph 2.6. This application has been submitted alongside another for 23 dwellings at Bird Crescent.
Sorry, Rex, you're on the wrong application at that point.
Is it? Yeah. Okay. I'll ignore that question then.
It's going to be my question on the next one.
Yeah. So I'm interested in the 130 spaces on South 5th Street that are allocated to this building. So who owns the land? How long is the lease remaining? And are these parking spaces currently remaining empty?
The parking that was highlighted in blue on the layout plan that I showed in my presentation is it's private parking, so it's owned by the former owner of the building. It was, if you look at the signs, it says for Argos HQ, Sainsbury's building. I believe the lease is around 900 and something years left, but as it says in the report, highways have said because there's no guarantee, because it is a lease and there is no guarantee of securing those spaces, that they don't want to consider them or secure them as part of the application, and have concluded that the application is acceptable without those spaces. That's not to say the applicant might not continue to use those spaces, but we can't secure them as part of the application, so we can't give them weight in our assessment.
It's paragraph 7.40, which says they're on a 999-year lease dated from 1986. So they've probably got around about 950 years left on the lease.
Did you have a follow-up?
It's interesting. After about 6 o'clock in the evening, there are 10,000 empty spaces in the city centre. Well, that's just a comment. Our objector mentioned, it's been up here before, that there are 6 spaces provided, allocated to this, although, of course, outside the curtilage of the building, there are lots of spaces. And previously, it was an office block which had lots of occupants in it consuming parking. It does say only 2, that none of them are disabled, even though disabled housing or disabled friendly housing is included within this proposition. And the right to reply, if I got that correct, was that there is some disabled parking within the parking that's on 150 South Street, and that provided that capacity, even though it's nowhere near the building, which also does make sense. And this application doesn't secure that car parking. So even if there was disabled parking facilities on there, you can secure that anyway. It's not secured by part of this. That's highly unsatisfactory, really. But also two will be of these 6 parking charges. Parking spaces will be for electric charging. And in the size of a project of this size, logic would say that you'd make all of them electric charging just to future-proof it. Why is it acceptable not to do that?
If you go to paragraph 7.46 of the report, it sets out what the requirement for EV charging, that the condition will be applied to secure EV charging on the minimal allocated spaces there are.
Was there a follow-up? Sniff. Any other questions of clarification from the committee? Go on then, Rex.
The ownership of the land is not a legitimate planning consideration. So is viability not a legitimate planning consideration as well?
Viability is a material consideration. It's in policy in our local plan.
But clarify that the applicants, we have lots of applications in the city already granted, all coming in that are unviable. Now, if I'm the applicant and I put in an application and I don't own the land, that's not a legitimate planning consideration. If I put in an application that's not viable, but that is a legitimate planning consideration, can we enlighten us as to what the difference between the two are?
Sorry, Councillor, can you just clarify what your concern is in terms of land ownership for a material planning consideration and a viability position as a material planning consideration? Can you just repeat your query for me, please?
The land ownership here is not in question, but it is not a viable, if they didn't own the land, it's not a viable planning consideration. But putting forward an application that says that I want to do something that's not viable is a legitimate planning consideration. But apparently it isn't because it's acceptable.
So, Councillor, a planning application could be made by an applicant against any land, whether or not they own it. Obviously, that's not the issue here. In terms of viability, that is deemed as a material planning consideration for the purposes of planning and for the purposes of determining an application. They are 2 separate issues, And I appreciate it can get a little bit complicated when we've got a difficult or a challenging site before committee to determine. But they are two separate issues. One is a material planning consideration, one is not.
The thing just to add to that is that the permission or otherwise runs with the land, not the landowner. Because obviously that land can be sold on to somebody else, but the permission and obviously any legal agreement that's associated to that permission would run with the land.
Is it, I always like to clarify things with a good analogy. So as a householder, I would be allowed to put forward an application for an extension to my house that I couldn't afford to build that extension. Whether I can afford to build it isn't a consideration about whether the council would approve that planning application. Much like this, whether they can actually afford to build it based on the money they're going to get returned. Apparently they're going to lose £17 million if they do it, which means they're probably not going to do it. But that's not something that we take on as a consideration. Is that a fair comparison?
It is, and it's what we experienced through the application and then the appeal for the point as well. So the inspector on that decision was, clear in terms of saying the scheme is unviable. Logic would say that it's not going to take place. If it didn't take place, you wouldn't get the benefits or the harms of the development. But if it does take place, then you've got to assess that application on the basis that it could conceivably happen.
And just to add to that, obviously, once an application is received by a local planning authority, there is a requirement for it to determine the application. Obviously, we can have conversations with applicants about all sorts of concerns and issues that we may identify while assessing and evaluating that, including viability. But there is a requirement on us to determine an application as well.
Satisfied? Good. Well, as satisfied as you ever are, Rex. Are there any other questions from the committee before we move on to the debate? We've gone there, right?
On the pictures that we had at the beginning, there was one that I'm sure we didn't have, or it wasn't clear here. So if we could go to the photographs that we saw, one showed the ground floor level. And it's big, so we can see it more clearly. And it showed the very large areas allocated to bicycle storage, which is admirable compared to some of the other applications that we've come in. Again, it's very blurred there. There we go. See, bike store, lots of bike storage. No car, nobody here is going to have a car, but lots of people are going to have a bicycle. The pictures that we see showing the different frontages from the different angles aren't really clear enough to identify what the outside of the building would look like where all those bicycles are going to be stored. So for security purposes, you want it to be a blank, solid, secure wall. And if I was a graffiti vandal, I'd be rubbing my hands in glee. So can the officer just explain to us what that would look like if it were built?
Appreciate it's hard to see on the screen, but it should be in your plans pack. The rear elevation on here is the bottom left. Just double checking. Yep, bottom left. So you can see some doors into the bike stores and some detail on the elevation. It's not a blank wall. It's this row along here.
I ask because we on the plan or on behalf of the people want to have active frontages that are well lit and displayed and make it an inviting place to be. But from these, the information that we're provided here, that's not clear. And I just wanted some reassurance that it's not going to be something dreadful.
Well, as I said, the bottom row has got doors into the bike store, so it's not a completely blank frontage to the rear of the building. It also faces onto Summer Court. Urban Design is content with it, as are the highways in terms of the arrangements for the bicycle store access.
It's the picture on the top left of page 8 of your plans pack, if you want to reference that. Councillor Smith.
The slight harm to the Christchurch cornerstone. I didn't quite understand that.
Whilst Elizabeth's looking at it, my recollection is it's to do, obviously it came from an objection from the conservation team, given that the church is a non-designated heritage asset. And obviously this would be a taller building within the setting of the church, so it would obviously have that interrelationship with the church in terms of the skyline within CMK.
That's correct. That's what the report says. And obviously there are other tall buildings in the area that sort of mitigate or have similar harm. So it's sort of a similar situation.
Any other last questions before we move to debate? No? Okay. In that case, I propose the recommendation for debate, which is item 6A, subject to the completion of the S106 agreement securing the obligations and terms set out in the main report. Permission be granted subject to the conditions set out. In the event that the S106 agreement is not completed within 28 days following the committee's resolution, the head of planning be delegated authority to extend the period for completion of the S106 agreement or, in consultation with the chair and vice chairs, refuse permission. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor McKean. Who would like to speak first on the debate for this? Councillor Montague, go ahead.
You were looking at me as it was the right thing for me to go first. If you'll indulge me for like 20 seconds, I feel like on the realistic possibility that the building is approved for demolition, thousands of people in Milton Keynes have worked in this building, including myself, over the last, I guess, 40-something years. So that should be noted. And it was also part of the Superman 4 filming. Some of that was inside the lobby of this building. So it is part of Milton Keynes' history and the history of Hollywood, I suppose. But on to things that matter for this meeting. I don't like the scheme. That's not really a relevant planning consideration. The thing that worries me the most is around policy DS3 and ER2. It strikes me that the location of this building, if we are going to change or ignore the policy to retain employment land, this is one of the worst possible locations to do it. Because of its proximity to Exchange House, where there is employment, to Holiday Inn, which would be primarily used by business people visiting the area, to the city centre. It seems a peculiar place to have a scheme that is entirely residential, and I appreciate that it is the officer's judgment that the benefits of the scheme outweigh those points. At the minute, I feel like I personally disagree with that, but I would like to hear other people's thoughts on that particular point as we go through the debate. I am also worried about the parking issue, although I could get past that if that was the only issue in isolation. But I'm more concerned about the change of use and the fact that it is entirely residential in an area that I don't think should be entirely residential.
Thank you, Councillor Montague. Who would like to speak next? Councillor Soden.
Yeah, I thought it's been interesting kind of going through points of clarification on this application. I do have some concerns similar to Councillor Montague, more so on the parking point. I think the idea around the change of use from employment to residential, it's not the first time we've seen this in the area. Was it, I think, the Almira, I think it's called? I think it's got a different name now. I think it's something that, although it's something we haven't seen for a long time because it's obviously been designated as employment land, if we are satisfied that it's been marketed to try and keep it that way, and it's still not being fulfilled. I think it's kind of reaching a point where I think I'm happy with the application. I have concerns about the parking, but through the clarification points raised by councillors but answered by officers, I am satisfied with it and I'm planning on voting to approve.
Thank you. And Councillor Trendall was next.
Thanks, Chair. It's difficult because there's definitely two sides to this argument. On the one hand, we've got, no disrespect to Superman, a fairly derelict and unloved building now, that wasn't at the time, it was Metropolis, to be replaced by a bright and shiny building, although that does look a bit like it's been penned by Albert Speer, sort of Berlin 1930s, but it's a style, and if you like it, you like it. And it's got some supporters, it's got some detractors, and amongst the detractors are CMK Town Council, of course. But then we've also got the MKCC Landscape Architect, the Conservation Archaeology Team, MKCC Waste Services and Anglian Water. And although they're not perhaps the Magnificent Seven, there's certainly a very solid five-a-side team there. But then on the other hand, we've got people who like it. BLMK, Integrated Care Board, like it, because they think they're going to get their hands on 800,000 quid, with which they're going to spend on resources to help the GP surgeries, except nobody believes that, because the last time they got their hands on that money, and the time before and the time before that, no one in the world has got a GP surgery in that part of the world any quicker than they had it before. So one wonders what they did with it. Thames Valley Police like it because they want work done on their control room and vehicles and ANPR and CCTV, and they want 65,000 quid. Quite why they need all of that when they're not going to provide exactly one whole police officer, in fact 0.95, and why the 0.95 police officer needs ANPR, CCTV, thought they already had it, and vehicles plural, no one's quite sure, but they're dead keen to get their hands on that cash. And let's not forget the travel planning coordinator from the City Council, who is hot to trot for 30 grand for new bus stops, even though we all know not a single bus will be provided to run on those routes or stop at those stops. So when it comes to that, it's a bit up in the balance, say 50-50, I look for a tiebreaker. And the tiebreaker to me seems to be things like parking's widely dispersed. I do believe the City Council's right. The Town Council's right, and we are in the realms now double counting. There's no play area, and the best one of all, yet again, there is no affordable housing. And again, we sell the people of Milton Keynes down the river because we won't change one policy. And we do it time and time again. And I'd like a recorded vote tonight because I want, coming up to the election, everyone who's going to cast a vote to know who said no to this because we're sick to death of no more affordable housing. I want it on the record.
Thank you very much. Anyone else like to go? Councillor Ken?
I listened to the question over there with regards to the view that there may or may not be Christ the Cornerstone, and the opposition of that is that there's other tall buildings in the area that will have that have had a similar impact. Are we not just deciding on this particular application rather than what's going on just to the north or just to the south, east or west? Yeah, the impact on the city church on this application, not how tall the buildings are elsewhere that are already up there. I'm a little bit confused because I thought we were supposed to be judging an application just on that rather than what's going on around it. Because if we're going to do around that, we're muddying the waters a little bit. And the other thing that concerns me is if we've got a fundamental policy we're going to go against, what I'd like to know is how does that void or devalue that policy at a later date, because somebody would turn around and say, I think I should have that because as ABC because X, Y, Z. You decided not to go with your policy on that. So if you decided it for ABC, I think X, Y, Z should get it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kendrick. Councillor Bell?
I just wanted to comment on the Christ the Cornerstone thing. It'd be very unusual to build a scheme of this sort of size anywhere in the country and it not cause some level of harm to heritage assets. Trust me, I've had exactly the same conversation with a client at work today. I didn't expect to have it again this evening. The main thing with heritage is there's nearly always going to be an impact on a heritage asset somewhere with a scheme of a certain size. It's the planning balance of whether that's acceptable versus the public benefit of the development scheme itself that's more sort of comes into play at this with developments of this sort of scale, provided this number of units, not so much whether not so much the whole any harm is bad, no harm is good, because it's almost impossible to develop sites with big schemes without causing harm to a heritage asset anywhere in the country, really. So,
thank you very much, Councillor Bell. Any last contributions from those who've not spoken yet? Councillor McLean.
Thank you. Start with the riposte to Paul's comment about having a recorded vote. This is a quasi-judicial planning committee. It's not for party use. If we wanted to do that, we should have been recording every vote for every meeting and publishing a league table just before the election. So I'm sorry, Paul, I'm very much disappointed you brought that up. We had two good speakers, Councillor Murphy and Jennifer Smith. I was swayed by Councillor Murphy's comments and also the riposte from Jennifer. This is the problem to me is we're in the wrong starting place. As Leo commented 40 years ago, and as we know from the parking 40 years ago, but the times are changing. We've got to adapt. And another point that was made about the counting of the parking spaces, the cumulative effect over a number, it will be maybe in 50 years' time we won't need so many because we'll be parking cars upright. I don't know, needing less space. And there was also a comment made about conversion of employment space into flats, and why couldn't that be done? Remind members of Station Square, 200 flats, but we then put Article 4 in place. So I'm finding it very difficult to come to a conclusion. We need more housing in the form, and I do agree with Paul, I don't like the fact there's no affordable housing in there. I don't like the fact there's not very much parking nearby, and particularly there's only 2 spaces out the 6 on the site that are actually for people with disabilities. And yep, there's lots of other things that are very good and some are very bad. No employment space on the ground floor is unusual in a development like this. I'd expect to see some shops that were for use by the residents and also by members of the public. But as we've heard several times, we're looking at the application before us. So at the moment, I'm swayed between yay and nay.
Thank you, Councillor McKean. Councillor Exon.
It's finely balanced, one might say. There are all sorts of reasons why this isn't very good, but not very many of them are legitimate planning considerations. As to the residents, the caveat emptor, the buyer beware, one of my favourite bits of Latin. And whilst there might be all sorts of things about this that don't seem quite right, it's entirely up to the person who rents the property as to their choice. It is very disappointing that this application comes forward saying it provides 6 parking spaces for 360 dwellings. It talks about, well, there are 130 somewhere else, but they aren't part of this application, and you can't secure those. So in next week, someone might put a planning application in to say, I want to build a block of flats on that bit of car parking as well. So that's grossly unsatisfactory, isn't it? So again, we'll listen to the remainder of the debate.
Not sure how much there is of the remainder of the debate, but I'm glad you're going to listen to it. Anyone else want to say anything? Councillor Kendrick, quickly.
Yes, quickly, Chair. Number of residents speaking about lots of different things, a little bit quiet, a little bit concerned, because like in other walks of life, other members, it has occurred to other members, and does it occur to officers, is that the lower you're prepared to position the bar, the more vulnerable we all are in general, because someone will always want to move the bar down yet again or crawl under it. And it's connected to my position earlier. If you go against a policy, it must devalue that policy, because I defy anyone that, especially if there's money involved, that you're not going to want to crawl under that bar or lower that bar down. And you're not going to argue if someone says no to you, no, you can't do that. And then they turn around and say, oh, but that policy didn't matter to you when ABC asked for it, you gave it to me, but you're telling me as XYZ that I can't have it. We're going to be undoing policies.
Chair, if I can just briefly respond to that. It was a point made to officers in terms of whether we consider certain issues. And I was just going to say, we consider, obviously, individual applications that come in across the EMK, also appeal decisions that we receive on those applications. They all go into, obviously, the consideration of the recommendation in front of members. Thank you, Chair.
Any more last contributions from the floor? No. Okay. So my role is to try and sum up that debate, as well as weaving in some of my thoughts. So bear with me as I weave. So starting at the end, Darren's point, I mean, policy conflicts in planning is the reason that this committee exists. If everything just meets every policy, then it ticks and it goes through. We're here to weigh the balance of harms. There are benefits, there are harms. Where do we think that balance sits? So it's not about bending and breaking policies. It's about the fact that there are always various shades of grey, and we're here to try and weigh them up between. For example, the parking issue, which has obviously been brought up quite a lot, as Rex mentioned, possibly in the questions rather than in the debate. This is going to be used as a residential thing, so parking doesn't clash with a lot of the employment use and the leisure use, which will be more during the day. So we're using the space more efficiently by having people there at both times of the day, potentially. There are something like 27,000 parking spaces in the centre of Milton Keynes. Most of those aren't used at night. If you drive around there at night, it's fairly empty because so much of Milton Keynes is either employment or retail. So there is an argument that there is quite a bit of space for that, and Highways agrees with that. Darren, you mentioned the tall buildings and what's around it. Yes, we are judging this on its merits, but its merits are influenced by the location that it's at, and so the other tall buildings around it are a consideration. If it was the first tall building in the centre of Milton Keynes, I'm sure we would be looking at this entirely differently, rather than the fact that there are several already in the area. I would caution members of the committee against suggesting that money is taken and never used through the S106. There are certainly several health centres that have been built around Milton Keynes, largely through developer contributions, and I think suggesting that there is some level of corruption and that it's not being spended is probably not a very constructive thing to do. Councillor Trendall? Councillor Trendall. The money...
Don't tell me I'm suggesting corruption for a start.
Paul?
Don't tell me I'm suggesting corruption for a start. That's out of order. I was referring to CMK. CMK has not had a new health centre built in it. Not for a very long time. And I've lived here nearly 50 years, so I would remember.
The exact location of the health centre, the S106 that are taken by the health board are used to supplement surgeries. In some cases, that's building new health centres. Sometimes it's extending, sometimes it's varying services. I think suggesting that it's just being squirreled away and not used is not a helpful contribution to the debate. I also think...
It's pressurising the health facilities.
Well, you've had your moment in the debate. No. I would also... I would also highlight the fact that the affordable housing is policy compliant. suggesting that we should have a recorded vote to highlight the fact that people in this committee are letting their residents down by voting against it because it's not got affordable housing is the worst kind of grandstanding and campaigning from this committee that you can suggest. As Keith has pointed out, we are a quasi-judicial committee. We are here to make a decision based on the policy. It's policy compliant. Voting against it on a policy that it is compliant with is leaving us open for an appeal, which we would lose. We would lose costs. You would be adding costs to people's council tax bills for voting against it on a reason that is undefendable and unjustifiable. If you want to serve the people, you've got to find a policy that it breaches and vote against it on that. Affordable housing is not the one because it is policy compliant on that side of things. Leo, I'm finally winding my way back to the start of the debate. You talked about whether this is the right place to put it, and yeah, no, I totally agree. If we were designing the city, we wouldn't put this building here, but we don't design the city. I think there's often a lot of criticism of the council on social media and in public discourse about the fact that the planning department is planning things and putting things in a certain place. In actual fact, the department that the officers are working for here is development management, which is a much more accurate title. We manage the developments that come to us and the applications that are made. And while I think, yeah, if we were planning this, if we were able to pick and choose exactly where to put it, we would probably put it somewhere different, but we aren't. We are judging the application that's been put before us, and we have to weigh the balance of harms on that. And when we're weighing the balance of harm, we have to remember that the first thing we look for is the MPPF, where substantial weight has to be given to the regeneration of brownfield sites unless there is significant harm. And I think while there are a long list of harms, as Councillor Bell pointed out, you almost can't build something around the city centre without some level of minor harm for one of the heritage assets, whether that's the listed building shopping centre or Christ on the Cornerstone. The significant harm perhaps isn't reached on that. I also don't like the look of this. I'm not quite sure I'd go as far as to say it looks like it's Albert Speer, but it's definitely not, again, definitely not something that I would design. I think there are more interesting examples of design across the city. I think it could look more interesting, but as Leo said, that's not really what we're judging here either. I think I've kind of touched upon what everyone said there. I think we'll all have to see where the balance comes out for ourselves. We'll go to the recorded vote, please, Alex.
Thanks, Chair. So, councillors, as a recorded vote has been requested, when I call your name, please indicate if you are for, against, or wish to abstain. And I'll start with Councillor Soden, please.
For.
Councillor Smith. Councillor Trendall.
Against.
Councillor Kendrick.
Abstain.
Councillor Montague.
Abstain.
Councillor Bell.
Abstain.
Councillor McLean.
For.
Councillor Exon.
Against.
And Councillor Brown.
For.
So that's 4 in favour, 2 against, and 3 abstentions, Chair.
Thank you very much. In that case, Rex, into your microphone. Thanks. The motion carries. Application is granted. I think the agent described that one as acceptable rather than exciting, and that's probably where we've come down on the line of. We'll move on to item 6B.
Chair, just before we go on, can I make a suggestion? Part of the debate we just had is about the number of high-rise planning permission that have been granted in the city centre. Could I ask that officers could do a briefing paper on where they are in relation to each other? I find every time we come to, there's a new one, there's another one that hasn't been built or has been built, whether they could give some consideration in the next municipal year to do that.
I will take that away between chairs and vice chairs and probably put it into the training pack for the new councillors in the new council year. So yes, item 6B, Lander, Lichfield Down. I will ask Tamlin to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. This application's at an allocated site in Walton at Lichfield Down, Lander Lichfield Down, for 33 dwellings. That includes 15 market houses and 18 of supported living accommodation. This is just the site plan. You can see there's a school to the north, a Brick Hill Street to the west there, and housing to the east and some open space. This is some photos of the site looking from the north into the centre. There's a community centre and a shop on the west side as part of the part of the surroundings. The site partly encompasses, goes around, an existing car park. This is just the site, some views to the west, looking at the landscaping, shielding the site from Brick Hill Street. And this is some photos at the south end of the site today. Note the landscaping has been removed. This is the site layout. So the supported living accommodation will be in two flats, two blocks of flats at the north side, car parking in between, and market dwellings to the south. There'll be a new access provided off Wades Mill Lane, and the other access will be off the existing access at the south side of the existing car park. Here are some elevations of Block J of the supported living accommodation. Just leave those for a bit. This is block number H, which is located a little bit to the west. And here are some elevations and plans of the house types. And this is the proposed street scenes. So the main key considerations: application is in material conflict with the Walton Neighbourhood Plan, allocation policy WNP 6A, and the design policy. It's also in conflict with the design policies of Plan MK and those controlling housing mix and tenure. We've got no good evidence to suggest the need for a nursery in the neighbourhood plan, which weakens the conflict, and the proposed uses are not incompatible with the aims of the neighbourhood plan. A refusal on design grounds cannot be easily defended. And the thing to bear in mind is to balance up the strong weight that should be given to the effects of providing supported living accommodation, for which there's an evidenced need. The benefits of adding to the housing supply, which if we don't have this, there won't be any housing. There'll be a shortfall in the housing supply. Developing underutilised land and other construction impacts. The application is acceptable in relation to other policies, including planning contributions and other policies, and the material considerations. It's a finely balanced decision in favour of approval. That's what the recommendation is, subject to conditions and obligations. Just a few points on the obligation. There's another application at Bird Crescent for 23 market dwellings. That's pending consideration. So if this application is approved, there would be an obligation to ensure that application at Bird Crescent would be that they couldn't build out the market dwellings without delivering affordable housing on this site. This application would also be providing 2 extra wheelchair accessible dwellings, and those would be underprovided at Bird Crescent, and conversely, this site is underprovides on the adaptable market dwellings, but this would be overcompensated at Bird Crescent. Now, you're probably wondering why you're not seeing Bird Crescent in front of you. Basically, if Bird Crescent is not approved as an application, then this doesn't result in harm. It results in more affordable housing being delivered at this site, which would give enhanced benefits. There would be a slight shortfall in readily adaptable market dwellings, but this harm would not be outweighed by the benefits of the extra affordable housing. And that concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have 2 speakers registered in objection to this application. So as before, I'll call you to the chamber floor and you'll have 3 minutes to speak. I'm going to start with Councillor Goodwin from Walton Community Council, please.
Hello, I'm Sarah Goodwin from Walton Community Council. Only 3 minutes to talk, so not long, so I'm not trying to repeat the objections already submitted via the planning portal, as this wastes more time or have been refuted by the planning officer in their public report pack. However, I want to mention that it is a high flood risk area and the third planned site has been removed due to this fact, and that it therefore won't make the developers the profit they were intending. Has the flood risk assessment taken place? I can't find anything, but that could be me trying to trawl through the copious amounts of paperwork. But the development should incorporate a SUDS or similar scheme to alleviate this. Access for emergency services will be a problem, as Wads Mill Lane is very narrow and it is heavily congested 7 days a week, and the parking provision is inadequate regardless of what is said. The development is not in keeping with the neighbourhood plan for Walton Community Council, which would prefer a children's nursery or a retirement home, and is a higher density than in the neighbourhood plan due to the provision of the 3-storey supported living blocks. Again, something that is not in keeping with the neighbourhood plan. It is likely that no nursery came forward, even if a demand, possibly because of the cost of buying land at commercial rates. It is not possible to confirm that statement, that there has been no interest in this type of development, so if houses have to be built, they must include affordable homes or social housing. Supported living units are not the same as affordable housing, so it is unacceptable to use the 18 supported living flats as an excuse not to provide affordable housing either on this site or the nearby Bird Crescent development, as the developers wish. It must be stressed that supported living accommodation is not the same as affordable or social housing. The proposal is that these units are designed for individuals who are in the early stages of dementia, and as such they require 24-hour attendance as they become confused and have a tendency to wander off. It is noted one block has secure access, which reinforces this premise. These units have no provision for staff to be present at night, which proposes an unacceptable risk. This secure access also suggests that these blocks need to be within a secure perimeter, as are other similar developments, so that residents can have free access to green space. The location of such units of too busy and noisy primary schools is not suitable for those with dementia, as it can cause them confusion in which could lead to aggression. And I would also like to note that the proposal for the site only includes 3 3-bedroom homes, which are in short supply in MK in general. And please note that the objections from Urban Design, MK Sustainable Construction Team and Glen Water do not appear to have been addressed. Such things as energy monitoring plan that has to be provided, lack of evidence that the surface water hierarchy. Okay, thank you.
Next, can I call forward down S. Copeland?
Good evening. It looks like it's still on. Right, so my name is Stuart Copeland, resident of Wavendon Gate. I chaired the resident-led working group to create the Walton neighbourhood plan that was adopted in 2017. We successfully refreshed the plan in 2022 to reflect the adoption of Plan MK. I'm sure you can appreciate the colossal effort required from Walton residents and the Community Council to deliver our plan. Milton Keynes City Council has therefore approved our plan twice. The neighbourhood plan is the preeminent development plan for Walton, which includes the Litchfield Down site. Policy WNP 6A says that if a suitable community use could not be found, development for housing would be supported. The policy clearly sets out the scale and type of development that would be acceptable. This was made very clear to the developer when they attended the Walton Community Council full council meeting in December 2024. Sadly, the planning application ignores the neighbourhood plan. It exceeds our dwellings per hectare requirement. It doesn't reflect the policy in the type of development. It's out of keeping, as per other parts of the neighbourhood plan, with the local area, particularly with 3-storey buildings planned. It does not meet the housing need in this area, as set out in the SHMA, which is typically 3-bedroom homes. And you will have seen many objections that point out the downstream real impacts of this application. Further, it was disappointing that originally this application was due to be determined via delegated powers. In my view, this is a serious procedural issue. If the planning team wishes to drive a coach and horses through a neighbourhood plan, it should be done in public. This is the second time the planning team has sponsored an application in breach of our neighbourhood plan. Anyway, to summarise, please reject this planning application and ask the planning team to come back with something that does comply with the neighbourhood plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The right of reply has been offered to the applicant and their agents, and I believe Jennifer Smith is returning. This time you'll have 6 minutes to speak, and I will still let you know when you've got 30 seconds remaining.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Jennifer Smith and I'm the agent for the application. The planning application before you this evening for consideration has been carefully designed following extensive discussions with your officers through pre-application engagement and discussions via a planning performance agreement. There's been a thorough assessment of the scheme by both planning officers and the statutory consultees, and the application has been deemed acceptable. As such, it's recommended for approval, and we respectfully request that members follow the advice of officers and grant planning permission. The planning application has been submitted by McCann Homes, but with full support of the Community Foundation, Amplius, who are affordable housing provider, and McIntyre. This planning application brings together these organisations that work to meet the needs of cities' residents. McIntyre proposed to operate 18 supported living units at the site and to build on the work that they currently undertake at Great Holme, supporting the need of adults with disabilities and learning difficulties. They intend to move residents from Great Holme to this site, thereby creating 18 bed space on their existing site, which will be used by the council to meet housing need. The council's housing strategy team support the development on the basis that there is an urgent demand for supporting living properties, and I can confirm that contrary to what you have heard, these are affordable housing units. From a planning policy perspective, the site is allocated for residential development in Plan MK and has been deemed suitable for residential use through the plan-making process. We acknowledge that the site is identified for a range of community uses in the Walton Neighbourhood Plan, but with the acknowledgement that some residential uses of the site could be appropriate, and this includes for retirement or sheltered accommodation. It doesn't state age-specific in relation to sheltered accommodation. The Community Foundation did not support the inclusion of the policy in the neighbourhood plan that excluded residential use from the site and have provided evidence to your officers that there is simply no need for a nursery use on the site. There are significant benefits to be delivered from this development. There is no need for a nursery, but there is significant need for supported living accommodation, such that McIntyre have been involved in the specific details of the design of the development of this scheme. This includes the design of the car park and the design of the buildings, which are based on their experience of current operations at Great Holme. The site is owned by the Community Foundation. Ian Revel from the Community Foundation apologises for not being here himself this evening, but he has asked me to say the following. The site has been listed on the Community Foundation's website as available for community use since the 1990s. The Community Foundation has been open to expressions of interest, and while 16 of the 50 Community Foundation sites have come forward for development, this one has generated no interest. The Community Foundation worked closely with Acorn's Early Years Foundation and have recently supported them in provision of a site at Kents Hill, but they did not express an interest in this site. And they've also held discussions with Heronshaw School about community uses, and again, they have not expressed interest in this site. The sale of the site for housing will provide the Community Foundation with a powerful opportunity to support the wider community in Milton Keynes. The funds generated from the sale are to be designated to the development of the city-wide community hubs, and there are 4 identified projects, which include a voluntary sector innovation centre at Granby, mental health and wellbeing centre in Whitehouse, an arts and cultural centre in Tattenhoe Park, and a gymnastics centre at Brooklands. The Community Foundation is an independent charity who are publicly accountable. The terms of operation require that the Community Foundation money is spent providing facilities across Milton Keynes, and this development will allow the Community Foundation to continue meeting the increased needs of residents in the city by growing the voluntary community and cultural sector. Given the lack of need for a nursery and the importance of making efficient use and the identified use of the site for residential development, it is appropriate to deliver development that will deliver a substantial community benefit. The Community Foundation have been clear that this site will serve as a model for future community-led development across the city. As set out in the committee report, the development makes appropriate Section 106 contributions, including to local health facilities at Walnut Tree Surgery. Taking all of the above into consideration, we respectfully request that you accept the recommendation of your officers and grant planning permission this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do the officers wish to offer any points of clarification raised by the speakers?
Yes, Chair. A flood risk assessment was submitted, and as detailed in the report, the slight areas in flood risk, it's found not to be sequentially preferable to have a different layout, and particularly because plot 1, which is one of the buildings within the flood zone, is a semi-detached dwelling. In terms of parking and congestion, the highways officer has no concerns about this in terms of the impacts on the school pickup time and the interaction given the parking provided. In terms of affordable housing, as Jennifer said, this is affordable housing. This is social rent housing. It's considered affordable housing. In terms of the one bedroom, it's true that the supported living accommodation is single bedrooms, but that is acknowledged. The conflict in the plan is acknowledged on that point. And I think that's all for now. Thanks.
If I can just add to that as well, Chair. The suggestion that we bring something back to committee that complies fully with the neighbourhood plan, that's not something that's within our gift or control as a local planning authority. As we went through in the previous item, we can only respond to those applications that are brought to us. We don't determine what those applications necessarily look like, although we do provide advice to try and steer them in the right direction. The point around the application originally being identified for a delegated decision, all applications on receipts are initially identified as being for a delegated decision until they're assessed to determine whether there is a trigger within the scheme of delegation that refers it to committee. One of those triggers may well be a call-in from a town parish council or a ward councillor. One of those triggers is whether it is a material conflict with an adopted planning policy. Both of those apply in this case. So we've clearly outlined there is conflict with the neighbourhood plan policy, which in and of its own right would mean there would be a referral to this committee, whether there was a call-in or not. And the plan does, the report clearly recognises there's conflict with neighbourhood plan policies, but that is obviously, we have the training throughout and discussions throughout the year is merely the starting point for a consideration and assessment of an application. So that's where the benefits and the material considerations need to be assessed against those conflicts. But obviously that's for committee and yourselves to make that assessment in terms of coming to a conclusion on this application. Thanks, Chair.
Just before I open it up, points of question, that call-in procedure and how things move from delegated to committee is the point of the National Scheme of Delegation briefing note from tonight, and I would encourage the parish councillors to have a look at the consultation, and if they've got any questions, reach out to us as well, because that will impact on your own role in this moving forward. Councillors have any questions of clarification? Let's do it before debate. Yes, Keith.
Well, Rex was trying to ask it last time. We had some indication this time at Bird Avenue. Could I ask the status, please, of where it is in the planning consideration, and is it going to be a delegated decision or a panel stroke committee decision, And is it the same developer as this application we are determining this evening? That's one question. I've got another follow-up.
That decision is currently pending consideration on the delegation. It is the same developer, yes.
At the moment, it's being determined by officers rather than by a...
It's not been called in, so there's no reason at this...
So the answer is it will be determined by officers, but it's not been called in.
Not necessarily. It is in part dependent upon the decision that is made tonight, because obviously there's a relationship between the provision of affordable housing on this site, this application in front of members, and that other application. So it has a strong relationship to the decision that's made this evening.
Thank you. And the other question is, I couldn't see in the papers whether a CEMP has been put into condition, though I do note we've now got a new condition 30 regarding hours of working. But have I missed the CEMP?
So condition, I think it's 31 now because we've adjusted the ordering. But that long condition you see at the end is the equivalent of a CEMP. It covers the same matters, and there's also an hours of construction condition added on in the update paper.
Sorry, just to help me again, where's the one about the CEMP? Which condition?
Sorry, that is now number 29 on 30 on the original committee report.
Yeah. I've just been looking for the expression CEMP, but that's, yeah, I can see what's in it. But so that's the equivalent of a CEMP. Thank you.
That's correct.
Any other questions from Darren?
It's not a question, Chair, it's just a point of information. Well, I say information because it's in the public domain. In the light of something earlier and the season or time of the year that we're in, I would like to reiterate that when I'm not employed as a counsellor, I do work in special education, teaching, but I do not, and I have not, had any conversations, any engagement or association directly as an individual with the applicant, not at any time. And obviously, because it's quasi-judicial, I will be making a decision purely on what's on this paper, not what I do for a living, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other questions on clarification from the committee? No? We're all happy? Okay, we will move straight on to the debate then. I recommend for debate item 6B, which is that subject to the completion of an S106 agreement securing the obligations and terms set out in the main report, permission be granted subject to the conditions set out in the main report and as amended by the update paper. And in the event that the S106 agreement is not completed within 28 days following the committee's resolution, the head of planning be delegated authority to extend the period for completion of the S106 agreement or in consultation with the chair and vice chairs refuse permission. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Keith. One of you, thank you. Who would like to open the debate on this one? Rex.
This site is currently owned by the Community Foundation, as we've been informed. 16 out of 50 sites allocated for community facilities have been developed over the last 50 years, and through personal experience, trying to get access to these plots of land is exceptionally difficult. The Community Foundation now and the Development Corporation and its predecessors make it prohibitively difficult to access any of these sites. And so 16 out of 50 have been put forward. But we are effectively selling the family silver, and when all the silver's gone, there'll be nothing left. And again, that is grossly unsatisfactory. I don't think that's a legitimate planning consideration. But it is grossly unsatisfactory. I'll stop there.
Anyone else want to contribute to this? I'll go Keith and then Darren.
Thank you. not sure I totally agree with what Rex has said, because I don't think the way the CF Community Foundation works as is in the way that you're suggesting. However, the application is at odds with parts of the local neighbourhood plan, but the benefits, I think, far outweigh the shortfalls in terms of being in accord with the plan. McIntyre are a great organisation, and looking at the housing mix, I can really understand why there are 18 one-bedroom flats. If you look at some of the organisations in Milton Keynes who support people who are perhaps not as lucky in their lives as we are, in their health, then most of them are single people. So having a mix where there's 18 supported living units out of the 33, I think is probably appropriate. And I do understand there are some concerns about what happens if people go walkabout. I would hope that that's something that the very experienced professional organisation that McIntyre is will take that into account. I think where it is in location to its neighbouring dwellings, and the point about the flooding and access by emergency services, I think in the paper I've read, they've noted them, and I think they are clear that they have taken all the impact into consideration before saying that there is no objection. So in this case, I should be supporting the motion.
Thank you, and Councillor Kendrick.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I appreciate the officer's comment with regards to the neighbourhood plan. It's just that I do think we need to be very, very careful, and I hope that we're striking a balance here on evaluating, because they are an elected body, they are representing the people in their designated area. It does cost that body quite a lot of money and time and resources into getting a neighbourhood plan together, consulting with local authorities and anyone else who needs to be consulted with to come up with a final product that is voted for by the people that they represent. And that needs to be felt that it is value for money, and people are listened to. Increasingly, as we find in the environment, is democracy, and people's vote in politics, even if it's politics with a small p, is diminishing, and it's very, very hard to make people feel that they are listened to and valued in their concerns as well as their comments. Thank you, Chair. With regards to nurseries, I can't imagine that this area of Milton Keynes is any different to any other Milton Keynes, as Milton Keynes is no different to anywhere in England or in the UK. If you speak to any commentator or any journalist, we are not awash with nursery facilities, so I'm not quite sure what I saw on one of those slides really stands up.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wish? Go, Sophie and then Leo.
Yeah, I mean, I understand residents' concerns, and it's always disappointing when an application comes in that is in conflict with the neighbourhood plan. But it is good. We do have a shortage of supported living in Milton Keynes for people with sort of disabilities and learning and dementia and things like that. And it's really nice to sort of see an application come in where all of the units are accessible as well, because obviously that's a really important part of it. The only thing I do have with some of these is seeing on the plans that there's only one lift allocated, and I think that can then cause issues when the lift breaks. You end up with people on the first and second floor that can't get off of that floor if they have mobility issues and can't use the stairs. So it would be nice in the future, if any more of these come in, to maybe consider 2 lifts, so you've got a little bit of a backup if one of them is out of order. But otherwise, it's generally good to sort of see, contrary to the application we saw earlier, which I think wasn't great for people with disabilities. I think this is a lot more suited to providing that accommodation, and we do have a shortfall of that in Milton Keynes, and we do need to make sure that we're providing that provision in the city for people as well, so that they can stay in the city. They have the option to stay in the city if they choose to. So on that basis, I'll be voting for it.
Thank you, and Leo.
Just very quickly, in response to something Councillor Kendrick said, Milton Keynes is not like everywhere else in the country. It's, of course, much, much better.
Different by design.
Yeah, different by design. A very brief comment. these types of sheltered housing units, in my experience from, talking to residents living in them, are so important to the residents and are, genuinely life-changing in some circumstances, to give people somewhere comfortable to live, with a nice community to live in, so that people can sort of live in dignity. I don't think, in my personal view, this is so very, very different from what was intended in the local parish council plan that it would be reasonable to reject it on the basis of it being different from that plan. And in overall, I think it's reasonable to use this land for what is being proposed. So I will be voting in favour.
Thank you. And any last comments from this side? Oh, sorry, Rex, go on.
I'm looking at the drawings that we have provided. I'm looking currently at page 18, but others as well. And I note that there are little letters indicating different things, and J indicates an allocated area for future solar panels. Well, arguably, I would say that any roof has an allocated space for solar panels. I'm sure the answer is going to be no, but what is it within our gift that would allow us to condition that solar panels be fitted as part of this application? And I don't know what is it within the powers of our officers that in future applications, that ambiguous things like this can be avoided.
We are past the point of questions. We're into debate. I think we're all keen on seeing more solar panels and heat pumps and things. I think we're all aware that we can't mandate it as part of a development. We can encourage and nudge and that side of things. I believe there are proposals being consulted on where that will become something that is mandated on, but at this point in time, when this application came in, we're not able to mandate it. Maybe they'll put them on. We'll see. Are there any other comments in the debate from the committee? No. Okay. Summing up. Yes. So whether or not the Community Foundation is a difficult organisation to work with, not a material consideration, unfortunately, Rex. What is a consideration is that this land was allocated for a community facility, was a nursery. There was a preference, if it wasn't a nursery, for a retirement village. Is this such a significant step away from that sort of use that it would be inappropriate? I think I probably fall with Leo that this is serving a community and the local community. The density consideration that was raised, I think, given that 19 of these are going to be flats for people who aren't driving lots of cars, presumably if they're in the supported living, means some of the density considerations would fall away a little bit on that. And as was mentioned, this is a type of housing that across the city we are sort of short of. It's in need. I'm personally much more enthusiastic about the sheltered accommodation than the rather tightly packed semi-detached houses, which all have slightly smaller gardens than I think good design has. But again, that's all within policy or close enough to policy that we can't overrule on that. I think those were the points that were raised, so we'll move on to the vote, please, Alex.
Thank you, Chair. Councillors, please raise your hand if you're in favour of the recommendation. And those against? So that's 7 in favour and 1 against, Chair.
Thank you very much. That means the motion carries. We'll move on to item 7, which is the TPO in Old School on School Lane in Loughton, and I will ask Jennifer to introduce the report, please.
Just a second, some mild technical difficulty. Okay, I'll just have to use this version. So this item is regarding the confirmation of a TPO, tree preservation order related to a pine tree at the old School Lane, Loughton. The pine is represented by the black circle labeled T1. It's in the northwest corner of the application site, due west of the dwelling. The strong visual amenity of the pine is apparent from afar even, as you can see there. It's a mature tree with a significant crown. Due to its raised position in relation to the surrounding land, it's easy to pick out in the longer view, and it appears as one of the tallest trees in the street view as one enters the conservation area on Bradwell Road, which is what you see there. As an evergreen tree, it's also visible throughout the winter, even when obscured by other growth. So that's the view towards the property from School Lane, which is where a number of heritage properties are located. As you can see, and as in the paper, the main focus is to consider whether or not to confirm the TPO based on the amenity value of the tree and the objection raised. The key points were whether the council was justified in serving the TPO, considering the wider context of the site itself and the local area. The site is a unregistered heritage asset. The objector followed up following the tree preservation, the tree officer had supplied some additional comments explaining everything to the objector, because I think they did not understand part of the section 211 notification, which is that the council may only either say yes, we may only either approve it or serve a TPO. So they have since agreed that even though they want their objections seen, they understand that the council has limited options. They accept that the tree will stay and no further works are currently under consideration. The matter is before you because an objection was received and the regulations require it to be seen by the committee once an objection comes in. The council's position, as backed by the MPPF, is to retain mature trees wherever possible, and the TPO was considered fully justified as seen in the tempo assessment that the tree officer submitted. That is in the annex of the main report. There was also a lack of evidence that the pine posed any risk to the property or people. Ultimately, we may only pause the removal of a tree, given that we can only approve or serve the TPO. So we tend to serve TPOs pretty much immediately as soon as we receive a notification that a tree of value is at risk. So that happens quite quickly once that comes through. Once in place, the TPO does not prevent the further application for the exact same proposal. It only allows the council to request that evidence is supplied that the tree should be removed based on whether it's a perceived or an actual risk. So when balanced against the irreplaceable loss of the pine, it wasn't considered to be overly onerous for the applicant to bear the responsibility of providing that evidence during a TPO application. It's recommended that the tree preservation order is confirmed without modification.
Thank you very much. We have no speakers on this. Do any members of the committee wish to comment or ask questions of clarification on this item? Okay, in that case, the recommendation is that the TPO is confirmed without modification. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Rex. Everyone on that side, apparently. Does anyone want to speak on debate in this? Leo?
If I may, very quickly. This is one of those instances where good residents, good councillors, good council officers all clash and have to follow guidelines and laws and regulations as they're written. And I think it's worth putting on record, having read through the correspondence between the residents and officers, it was all done in a very reasonable manner, I think, and a reasonable solution or reasonable position has been landed on. And I think it's one of those cases where all parties come out feeling probably okay with the outcome. I just thought it was worth putting that on record, especially as I'm a ward councillor for the area.
Thank you. Keith?
Thank you. What an ugly tree it is. It didn't look like what I expected when I got to the pictures. But I thank you very much for an excellent report, Jennifer. It was very clear, and I could see that I think the objectors misunderstood it in the beginning what was happening. They didn't want it to go particularly, but they wanted to preserve some of it. But in the way we've got to where we are, I think there's absolutely no question that we should be confirming the TPO, and if they want to come back at some later date, they're entitled to do so.
Anyone else want to speak? No? I agree with both of those comments. Yes, not the tree I was expecting. Not the finest specimen, but still an interesting one in the view. And as with all TPOs, as you say, Keith, they're able to come back and ask to be able to do work when necessary to the tree. So it's easy enough for them to do so. Are we all agreed with confirmation without modification? Agreed. Lovely. In that case, just before we close tonight's formal business, tonight is the last full committee of the municipal year before we're all up for election. So I'd just like to extend on behalf of the committee thanks to officers for all of the work over the last year. Excellent reports, wonderful answering of questions even when they're not the most sophisticated questions to help us simpletons understand. So thank you very much for that. We'll close tonight's business at 8:52. And if anyone has any questions about the National Scheme of Delegation report, feel free to come and chat to the officers now.
I'd just like to add my thanks, and I hope the thanks of the committee for your chairmanship during the year, Stephen. It's been very good, well led, and we've done some good business.